Flights between Australia and the United States are always a topical conversation when it comes to the expat community here, but also travel lovers as well. Who should you fly with? How much does it cost? And how long does it take to get from one side of the Pacific to the other? They're the common questions that I hear quite often. So stick around. I'll give you the answers to those, as well as having a look at the annual Skytrax Awards, which is known as the Oscars of the aviation industry. Who is the best airline in the world? Who's the best airline to fly from LAX to Sydney? Stick around. All that and more to come.
Do you come from a land down under? Oh, where women glow and men plunder. Oh, can you hear the thunder? Oh, you better run, you better take cover. Oh.
You know, I have lost count on how many times I've made that long haul flight between Australia and the US. Living in Nashville, my journey typically has been a 4.5 hour flight to LA, followed by about a 15-hour flight to Sydney, and then another half an hour flight to Canberra. Now, with all of the layovers and flights, if I can get home in under 24 hours, I'm doing pretty well. Actually, last time I went home, it took about 30 hours to get back there. So when traveling between Australia and the US, there are a few straightforward direct flights that you can take, and there's also a few around out-of-the-way ones as well. You can fly via Asia, Europe, or the Middle East. It also depends upon where you live in the US and where you're going to in Australia, because we're both really big countries and it takes about 5 hours to fly from one side to the other in both of them. So today, let's have a look at the Trans-Pacific flights, because that's probably the most common route, and that's the one from LA to Sydney. So for direct flights between LA and Sydney, you have an option of Australia's Qantas, and also known as the Flying Kangaroo, American Airlines, United Airlines, and Delta. It's a 15-hour flight between LAX and Sydney. Virgin Australia was always my preferred airline to travel on that route, but they stopped flying during COVID. So let's take a look at the cost of flights. I'll use December of this year as an example of a round trip. Christmas is usually a little bit more expensive, but given that it's still 6 months away, these flights are actually pretty decently priced, so it's worth having a look at. So looking at these flights, you can see between the 4 different airlines, there's really not a lot of difference between them in prices. But there are some other options that we have as well. Air New Zealand. So Air New Zealand is an airline that I flew with a bunch when I lived in Fiji and in Samoa. Loved Air New Zealand, never had a problem with them. They have a flight that goes from LA to Sydney and it's via Auckland. It has a 2-hour stopover in Auckland. Coming in actually cheaper than those direct flights for that same time period. Air Canada, they have a flight from LA that goes from LA to Vancouver and then direct from Vancouver to Sydney. Now, it's actually right now the cheapest option that you have of getting back to Australia, but it does add around 7 hours to your flight time by the time you fly up to Vancouver, and then that flight from Vancouver to Sydney is also a little bit longer too. Hawaiian Airlines, they have a flight from LAX to Honolulu. You stop in Honolulu for an hour and then you fly on to Sydney. It's about $1,200 for that one. There's also the very popular Fiji Airways flight that flies from LAX to Nadi, which is Fiji's second largest city and home of its international airport. It has a 5-hour stopover and it's $1,135 currently. The downside of that flight is you might think that, oh great, I'm going to go and stop over in Fiji, but it's a 5-hour stopover. You land at 5:45 a.m. in Fiji. There's not much open, I can tell you, in Nadi around that time, unfortunately. The international airport actually in Nadi is very close to Denarau, which is the port, and there's a beautiful Sheraton hotel there. So if you do get a chance to stop over in Fiji, I would suggest stopping for a couple of days. For those traveling from the east coast of the US to the west coast of Australia, you might want to fly the other way because it depends upon your layover times. It can actually be quicker to go via Dubai, Doha, or even going via Hong Kong with Cathay Pacific. Now, I've been a SkyMiles member with Delta for many, many years. I've always found Delta great on the long legs and pretty good on the domestic flights as well. Now, maybe it's the southern hospitality with Delta being based out of Atlanta, Georgia, but I've always found them very comfortable and the service fantastic. I ran a quick poll of Australian expats that live in the United States yesterday, and I was very surprised by the results. I had 303 respondents, so thanks, guys, for helping me out with this one. And I asked the question, who is your preferred airline for the direct flight back home? I was really surprised to see United Airlines coming in at number 1 with 45% saying that they preferred United, 35% said Qantas, 12% Delta, and only 6% saying American Airlines. Many people also commented that Air New Zealand were their pick, and they also commented on how much they dislike Qantas. So Australians' national airline it is. Much of the dislike of Qantas has to do with how the airline treated expats during COVID. There were flights cancelled, there were ridiculous flight prices, and a general disdain in trying to get people back home. United Airlines, for me, have always been my airline to avoid, so I was really surprised to see the expat community name them as the top pick. I wish that I could say that Qantas is great, because I would love to have our national airline as my airline, but I've never had a great experience with them. Let's take a look at the Oscar Awards of the aviation industry, known as the Skytrax Awards, with the company releasing their list of the best airlines in the world for 2024. The rankings are based on reviews by over 21 million passengers from over 100 countries. In the end, it was Qatar Airways that finished in the number one spot, narrowly beating out one of my favorite airlines, Singapore Airlines, for the number one position this year. The news was not so good for North American or Oceanic Airlines, with none of them finishing in the top 10. Dubai's Emirates came in at number 3, with Japan's All Nippon Airways coming in at number 4. Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific came in at number 5, and it also took the title for the world's cleanest airline. Kind of important too. Japan Airlines come in 6th, and Turkish Airlines at number 7, being the leading European airline. An airline which actually services more countries than any other airline in the world, 119 different countries at last count. Taiwan's Ava Air finished in 8th, with Air France at number 9, and Swiss International Airlines coming in at number 10. British Airways, they came in at number 13 this year, and Fiji Airways was the pick of the Oceanic Airlines. It finished at number 14, moving up from last year as well. Delta Airlines was the leading American airline, coming in at number 21, just ahead of Air New Zealand at 22. And Australia's flag-carrying airline Qantas, it came in at 24, down 7 spots from last year. Air Canada were at number 29, actually improving by 9 spots. And of the other American-based airlines, United came in at number 42, Alaska Airlines at number 60, American Airlines at 78, and Southwest Airlines, who I guess are seen as more of a budget-style airline here in America, came in at number 93, just making the top 100. So for those of you that can afford to sit in the pointy end of the aircraft, Singapore Airlines were ranked number 1 for first-class airlines, just ahead of Air France and Emirates. Qatar Airways took out the best business class, and just have a look at some of these seats in business class with Qatar Airlines. British Airways won the best family-friendly airline, so great job, Britannia. The world's best airline lounge went to the Plaza Premium Lounge in Rome's Leonardo da Vinci Rome Fiumicino Airport, or FCO for short. I prefer FCO. The World Airline Awards actually began in 1999, and Skytrax launched its first global airline customer satisfaction survey back then. So for those of you that are looking to make that flight from LA to Sydney, maybe Fiji Airways is the way to go. The top-ranked airline out of any North American or Oceanic Airlines, and why not break up that 15-hour flight with a stopover in Nadi. So there you have it, the world's best airlines for this year, and the choices that you have in traveling between the US and Australia. Right now, I just prefer any airline that will get me there cheaply. See you next time.